A brand new bridge between Canada and the US is being held back from opening because of the trade negotiations. That's not the only issue at the border. The DEA has just said they are going to be keeping an eye on Canada. The risk level has increased enough where they will now be opening 2 offices on Canadian soil, which is wild to see. Maybe they have to based on the new situation we have developing at Canadian airports, which is absolutely insane. Speaking of insane, BC and Mark Carney confirmed today they are not working for Canada or Canadians, that their interests come first and they're happy to watch Canada burn down. Speaking of not working for Canadians, we got a giant announcement from a U.S. representative who wants to make a big change when it comes to the U.S. politicians, and this should be happening in Canada as well, especially with the new negotiations that we're seeing with the US and a different country applying pressure to the Canada-US relationship. And at the end of the video, we got an update on that crazy heist we saw in Canada. That's a fun one. Lots to talk about in today's video. So let's get into it. All right, jumping right into the bridge story. This actually is a big story for a multitude of reasons. What it says, what it means for things moving forward. But this bridge connection between Canada and the US is being blocked, and it is all having to do with the trade negotiations. Tonight, Windsor's mayor says he doesn't want the Gordie Howe International Bridge rushed into opening if it means Canada ends up with a weaker trade deal. He warns the project is being pulled into a much larger cross-border negotiation between Canada and the United States. CTV's Michelle Mlesky explains, as light testing continues on the Gordie Howe International Bridge, Windsor's mayor is worried decision-makers will sacrifice the long game for the short-term opening of the city's second bridge. We've fulfilled our end of the bargain, and now to weaponize this and to hold this bridge hostage is just a crying shame. The bridge opening has been tied to trade renegotiations with the Americans by a Canadian minister and the president himself. If it means our country has to take a bad deal to satisfy the president of the United States, I would wait until there's a time when there's a good deal, because we do have lots of leverage in this country. Dens, you know, people keep saying that like Canada is going to refuse to take a bad deal and that we have lots of leverage in this country, but they never bring the positive leverage forward like we talk about with all of the mining projects, all of those things. It's always like we're not going to settle for a bad deal. Guess what, guys? You're gonna have to settle for something. Right now, the talks are basically non-existent. And if we want to be real for a second, at the end of the day, they are the largest market with the highest consumer demand in the world. There almost isn't a market or economy that even has the potential to do what America does because of their appetite for buying and experiences. So yes, if we want access to the market, we got to find a way to provide value. And unfortunately, the argument of why aren't you being nice to us doesn't work anymore, especially since Canadians have burned a lot of goodwill during these trade negotiations. Not only the goodwill, we talk about the security issues all the time and the border issues. And now we've got this update here that they are keeping an eye on Canada. The US DEA plans to open new offices north of the border. And we had touched on this briefly in another video, but I did not, and I knew that they were going to be ramping up their investigations. I knew that they were going to be ramping up their focus on the Canadian side of the border, but I did not know that they were going to be setting up full offices on the Canadian side of the border. And we have some clips of some of the reasons as to why they are refocusing on the Canadian side of the border, which we all know is due to international factors. So the idea that this is a Canadian issue is so funny to me because it has almost nothing to do with Canada. However, there actually is an important detail, and here, let's get into it. Receive the precursor chemicals. We need to make sure that we keep an eye on the northern border as well. We see more precursors coming into the port of Vancouver coming into Canada, and the Canadians through with the Mexican cartels and country has started producing and manufacturing in Canada the fun powder that starts with an F. Hey, you know what? Maybe we don't even need CUSMA USMCA. After all, we got Canada and Mexico and the US all working together. Jeepers, creepers. This is not how I want us to work together, guys. In the last 2 months, there's been significant seizures of in Canada. Do they cross our country to get there? They arrive at Port of Vancouver. Okay, and then they transition through Canada to the different source locations for manufacturing, production, and then it comes across our northern border. It's something that everybody at this table is worried about. Port of Vancouver. Worth noting when we get into the BC stuff, we continue to keep the pressure on China, on India, continue to target the leadership in the cartels, but very conscious of what's going on in the northern border as well. Northern border. And he also specifically said, which 2 nations, China and India, the 2 nations which are hollowing out Canada from the inside as we become a thorn in America's side. So that's great to see. But we also have this statement here, specifically on the northern border. Front is launch, and in put up stand up. the first of its kind Homeland Security Task Force in Alaska, which allows us to take a lot of the funding, resources that we have access to and put more agents and intel folks not just from the FBI, but from the other agencies across the board. And what we've also focused on, at least at the FBI, is working with our Canadian partners on the production capabilities that the drug traffickers have moved up to the north of our border and specifically fly into Alaska and also into mainland America on tribal lands. And we've had some. So he just said an important detail there. He said tribal lands because that happens a lot in Canada as well. Success. They're working with our Canadian partners because the drug traffickers got smart with the securitization of the southern border and moved it up there. So we're tackling that with our CEAS partners. It's absolutely crazy that Canada is proving itself to be such a problem when it comes to this situation. And the funny thing I always see is, well, Mexico is still worse. The US is still worse. I don't care. The point is Canada is trending in the wrong direction. I never understand that argument. Other people are still worse than us. Who cares? Let's have higher standards for ourselves that we don't want it to continue to get worse, especially when we get into this insane airport story, which is nuts. But before we do, check out today's sponsor. Now this is for my viewers down in the United States, cause Medicare down there, it's a bit of a mess, and we talk about it all the time on the channel. The governments make these programs intentionally opaque. They make it difficult to understand, and they are not designed with your best interests in mind. There are thousands of plans, and the government's own Medicare website has already been flagged for inaccuracies, and that's why most people just end up taking what the broker pushes on them and then just hoping for the best. But we know hope is not a strategy as a Canadian from the outside looking in. It's getting hard to watch, and that's why I got to tell you about Chapter, because Chapter is the only national advisor who actually takes time to compare every Medicare option, not just a few of them. And that's why a woman named Lisa, she left a customer review. She said Chapter helped her find options that weren't even on the Medicare.gov website. Chapter's advisors are independent. They are unbiased, and the call is completely free. It takes under 20 minutes, and you can find out if your coverage actually fits your needs. And did I mention that the call is free? And that's why you got to call Chapter. The number is 877-204-4194. Again, that is 877-204-4194. Get the data, get the facts. We love facts on the channel. Get it right, and call Chapter today. You got to call them, guys. Once again, make sure you listen to that male model, YouTube tycoon, perhaps US-Canada ambassador. Anyways, we've got this story here that is happening at Canadian airports. And when I first read it, I was like, no way. But it turns out it's quite real. Investigation reveals organized crime groups exploit airport insiders to move the fun powders, uncovering troubling gaps in security. And they've got this quote: you could walk out carrying a cruise missile. Passengers traveling through Toronto Pearson International Airport face layers of security designed to stop the dangerous people and dangerous goods from boarding planes. And what this story is talking about is that the corrupt Pearson Airport is innocent Canadians are being detained after their bag tags are switched in the drug smuggling scheme. This may just be the tip of the iceberg. What's happening is because of the low standards inside Toronto Pearson Airport. And by the way, go to a quick walk around Toronto Pearson Airport and see if you can find a Canadian. We even showed a video of one of their hiring fairs for the airport. Let's just say Operation Curabam is in full effect at the airport. That being said, imagine you go to the airport, you check your luggage, you go to another country and you go to pick up your luggage and they say, hey, by the way, we just found your bag had a ton of illegal stuff in it, and you're going, what happened? It was either switched on you or they switched just the tag, because they're taking off the stickers, the tags that go around your luggage, and they're putting them on other suitcases and then slipping them through. And there were Canadians who were getting arrested in other countries with tons and tons of illegal stuff inside of their alleged suitcases that never belonged to them. They had nothing to do with it. It's all being switched on them behind the scenes at the airport through all of these backdoor means. And some of the countries they've landed at have like the death penalty for these crimes. So like this is an insane risk for Canadians. And now you can see why the DEA might be somewhat more interested in what's going on at our ports and airports. Shout out to Jamie Sarnak here for her little call out. She said, I can't stand that. Airport corruption is so bad that we're getting PSAs like make sure to record your bag being weighed in the third. Worldification continues. I hope more robots take airport jobs because they'd be more trustworthy than the current wave of hires apparently. And here's the warnings here we are getting from the Canadian airports. And by the way, something tells me it's not actual Canadians who are involved in this. This is not a Canadian problem. This is all new. It's all international. And we pretend like, oh, it's Canada who's getting worse. It's all those Canadians. No, it's not. Canada has issues. And Canada has Canadians who are issues. But let's just say it's not the ones involved in all of this. These are the Canadians who are causing Canada issues. Basically, Mark Carney here is going off about his conditions for the new oil pipeline. And it's important because once we get into Premier David Eves' clips on how he plans holding Canada back, we'll see why all of these statements are very important. Now, as you may have heard, we're also advancing discussions on a potential pipeline too. Off the rip, he can't just say on a pipeline. Just because you said on a pipeline doesn't mean it's approved. He still has to go out of his way to say on a potential pipeline because this pipeline is not going to get built. Transport at least 1 million barrels a day of low-emission Alberta crude to Asian markets. The pipeline will only advance thank you. There we go. I'd like to welcome the pathways to this. The pipeline will. By the way, he's at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. This is as we're talking about the Vancouver ports and all of the issues with the U.S. government will only be advanced with the following prerequisites being met. The first is the building and pathways renamed the Oil Sands Alliance. This, aka the $26 billion fart collector, is the world's largest carbon capture, utilization and storage project. He will make Alberta oil amongst the lowest intensity carbon intensity per barrel produced in other words on a scope 1 scope 2 basis. They want to suck off some smokestacks and then pump that carbon underground. Why do you need to introduce just a new level of risk that is so unnecessary? Secondly, it requires that British Columbians should share substantial economic and financial benefits from projects that include or impact them. And thirdly, does not impact them. Requires fully respecting Canada's duty to consult under Section 35 of the Constitution, non-negotiable. So very important that he says Canada's duty to consult, and it is non-negotiable. And he's talking about consulting with the Indigenous tribes, who of course are standing in the way. So much so that in this very clip, one of them says, there's no pipeline happening. We will be standing in the way. Bluntly, we cannot have bad behavior. Decide who gets engaged with by the federal government. Premier E.B. blasting Alberta Premier Danielle Smith for leveraging separation talk in her province to get Ottawa's growing support for a pipeline to BC's coast. Yayas meeting Wednesday with Carney in Vancouver, and we need to have at least as much enthusiasm from the federal government for BC projects as they've shown for Alberta projects. You don't even have enthusiasm for BC projects. You have been holding up BC projects. You shut down everything. He is one of the worst primers in Canada because he refuses to let his province actually develop anything to the point where now almost all job creation in BC is pretty much just working for the provincial government. On Friday, Ottawa and Alberta agreeing to what they call an implementation deal that includes lowering the rise of Alberta's carbon pricing to $130 a ton by 2040 instead of $170 per ton by 2030. Only negotiated with one government, the government of Alberta. The Prime Minister needs to answer for why he made that decision. It's not one I agree with. The NDP consistently points to a lack of a proponent or route for a new Benjamin pipeline. And there's no proponent because they want a $26 billion fire collector. They still want an increase in carbon tax, somehow saving money. And BC and the Indigenous are saying they will shut down the pipeline and not allow it. Strongly oppose a route to the north coast favored by Smith, which would mean lifting the existing oil tanker ban. The opposition say it's time to move forward, support a pipeline, get to the table, work with the other levels of government, and get these jobs in BC. Now, the NDP has emphasized what it calls $88 billion worth of different beak-based energy projects. This is a government that is desperate to look like it is the capable of getting developments underway, that it is capable of getting shovels in the ground. The pipeline plan involves an Application to the Major Projects Office. By July and the goal of shovels in the ground by next fall. Many First Nations oppose a route through BC, north or south. Well, they oppose it for now until we offer them $600 million. Say a pipe dream to get a project in. By September 2027. A dream looking in. He just said it's a pipe dream. Nice. Pun. To get a project in by 2027. So, he's already saying that like no chance. Are we going to allow this? Mark Harney just said that it has to be non-negotiable that we have the consultations. Okay. Increasingly like a reality and motivating BC's premier to push the feds for more support for BC Dream projects. Almost all of the BC Dream projects are net zero nonsense carbon capture. Nonsense. They're make-work projects that nobody wants, nobody cares about. We have our premiers and our governments continuing to hold people back, and Kirk Lubmov called it out, and he said the unfortunate part about Danielle Smith's premiership is that she has surrounded herself with the most incompetent, unambitious wet noodles. Here is her Deputy Chief of Staff Patrick Malson, and he re-yooks Mark Carney's word for word on how a massive increase to carbon taxes will make our industries more competitive. If the Chief of Staff of the Conservative Party of Alberta is saying carbon capture is basically about making Alberta energy more competitive in a world that increasingly rewards lower emissions, think of it like two gas stations selling the same fuel for the same price. It's not the same price you absolute if Station 2 qualifies for rebates, investments, or preferred contracts because the fuel was produced with lower emissions. It gains an advantage and can eventually pass some of the value along to customers. There you have it, guys. The Chief of Staff of the Conservative Party of Alberta, the most conservative-based province in Canada, is talking about how carbon capture net zero makes Canada way more competitive on the global scale. And here's what's actually happening on the global scale. They build a pipeline in a few months. Meanwhile, Canada takes approximately 1 century, and it ends up costing 20 times over budget and taking down at least 6 governments. That's very funny. From my screen is red. And they are saying this in response to that. We're finding out that the UAE, which we've talked about before, starting their new pipeline that is supposed to be bypassing the Strait of Hormuz, is already 50% completed and going to be operational by 2027. We just saw in the last clip that it's a pipe dream for us to be even starting construction by the end of 2027. But somehow in the UAE, they're already almost finished. There is an actual timeline, a time crunch for Canada to get smart and get out of our own way and actually start producing. If